Alright, shalom YouTube. So in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly run down the calendar aspect of things, because even if you go to ChatGPT, a lot of people are under the misconception that it refers to the biblical calendar and it understands the dynamics of, right? So that said, if you refer to the other videos, and I'm not sure what they entail entirely, but I gave an intro to Messianic Judaism and what have you, but this is the calendar aspect of Messianic Judaism that the majority don't understand, right? So basically, you have to look at, we currently live under the Gregorian calendar for the most part, right? Which was installed by the Pope, right? And the Gregorian calendar is a derivative of the Julian calendar, right? And in the original Julian calendar, they didn't name the names of the months for the winter months, like January and February. They had no name. And the new year began around the Ides of March, right? During the spring. So that said, a lot of people are under the misconceptions today based on this perpetuated dogma, basically is what it is. It's a matter of people having some level of authority over them rather than acknowledging that Yahweh is the authority, right? So you have people that basically are supremacists that want to control everybody, and that's in every dynamic. So that said, you had YahShua and the Israelites, right? And YahShua is preaching from the Torah. He stated quite clearly in John 4:22 that salvation is of the Jews, and Romans 2 clarifies that Jew isn't won by heredity but by obedience to the Torah, which is the Ten Commandments, which neither modern Christians nor Orthodox Jews follow, right? And I'll clarify that in a moment. So that said, it's a matter of being obedient to that Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. So there's more than just the Ten Commandments. There's the holy days and how to observe the holy days, and we gave you those little finer points to the law, because the Torah is the book of the law, but the majority, again, don't follow the book of the law. They follow the vain traditions of men, like the 613 mitzvah, Kabbalah, or other variations. So that's what the point of this video is validate how, in particular, modern Christians aren't Christians and Orthodox Jews aren't Jews, right? So again, going back with YahShua being a Jew that proclaims salvation is of the Jews and what have you, and going back to the Torah and the Ten Commandments, you'll have Baptists that will proclaim the Ten Commandments. You might have the Jehovah's Witnesses that talk about the 144,000, and you have Mormons that are in a similar dynamic, and all of them are trying to be obedient to a degree, but a lot of them are also following the vain traditions of men, which and ultimately leads back to Emperor Constantine, because 300 years after YahShua, Emperor Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, which is a literal day to worship the sun, because he was a sun god worshiper, right? And he was the emperor. He wanted that level of authority over Christianity, and Christianity goes up against secular governments, and he was a secular government, so he wanted that authority, right? So that said, when he changed the Sabbath to Sunday, it broke two commandments, right? It was no other gods before me, as well as the weekly Sabbath. And the weekly Sabbath is more than just a day of rest. It's more a matter of understanding the true biblical principles in the biblical calendar too, right? So Emperor Constantine took that sun god worship from the Egyptians, who took it from the Babylonians, where Nimrod was worshipped as the sun god Baal, his wife Semiramis was worshipped as Ishtar, the queen of heaven, where the concept of when you die you go to heaven comes from, and their son Tammuz, being born after the death of Nimrod, was considered to be his reincarnation, becoming the new sun god Baal, right? So if you look at your mythology and what have you, where it talks about, I think in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the relationship between Ishtar and Tammuz, I believe it does. I haven't ever actually read it. I only remember segments of it from college and what have you, where they talked about it briefly. And then you would understand that it's a possibility that Ishtar, Semiramis in other words, had relations with her own son Tammuz, right? And that's where, like, the breeding like rabbits during Easter sounds like Ishtar for a reason. Symbolically, she was the goddess of fertility and what have you, breeding like rabbits around Easter. December 25th celebrates the birth of Tammuz. It has nothing to do with YahShua. So a lot of people are under that misconception. And it's a matter of not celebrating your birthdays. So a lot of modern Christians will understand partial truths, but they don't understand the complete truth. And I'm still not completely understanding myself, but I'm more prominent than the majority. So a lot of people will go up against me because I use my biblical name, Obadiah, online, my online presence for the most part. I haven't really fully asserted that with the family. I have more recently in this court case that's coming up, and you can watch these videos, the police brutality and what have you, where I was trying to assert it more on the more offline presence, right? Because it is my right, it's my constitutional right, it's my civil right, it can't be violated, but they did violate my rights, right? But anyway, carrying on, so going back to the calendar. So when Emperor Constantine did what he did in Moravia, that changed the dynamics of the biblical calendar, and Christians became more complicit with a Roman law and following the Roman calendar, which is the Julian calendar, which eventually became the Gregorian calendar, right? So that's something that's been perpetuated for a multitude of years. So now if you were to look at the Orthodox Jewish calendar, otherwise known as the Hebrew calendar, which isn't the actual biblical calendar, you would understand that the majority of the names of the months that they use are Babylonian in nature, like the first month being Nisan, right? However, biblically, the first month of the year is Abib, which in Hebrew translates to come alive, because that's when the barley comes alive, right? So when the new moon comes in, which is the beginning of a new month, if the barley is not alive, then they carry on with the year, so it'll be a 13th month, in other words. And after that 13th month, then the next new moon cycle will start the new year, because by that time the barley will be alive, right? So that said, that's where that comes from, and that's where a lot of misconception that correlates with like the Ides of March in a sense, right? But that's trying to have some kind of static control over everything rather than being a little bit more carefree and whimsical. It has its own structure, but you have too many people being overly structured. And the reason for the overly structured dynamic is because people don't understand basic principles, and that's why governments globally are against the basic principles of the Bible, because that gives them that level of control over the people, right? Doesn't matter what country it is and what have you. That's why in Revelations it states quite clearly all nations have been deceived by the whore of Babylon, right? So carrying on, in one of the names of the months of the Ashkenazi Jews, they call it Tammuz, right? Which is that same Tammuz from Babylon, the same Tammuz that was born on December 25th, right? So you see the correlation there, right? So me being affiliated with the Black Hebrew Israelites, maybe I understand a little bit more thorough dynamic than the majority, because they actually read the Bible. They actually understand the Bible a little bit more. But being obedient to the Ten Commandments is a different story. So they're still progressively trying to become more obedient, like I am. But nevertheless, it's progressive in that level. Whereas you have the Democrat progressive, which is, well, if you go up against us, you're not about the truth, and you're against science. Science means knowledge. Knowledge would imply fact. However, they don't, as you can see with this gender identity crisis and everything else that's going on, they don't follow facts. They follow their feelings, right? It's all about their feelings. So you go back to the calendar aspect of everything. So let's deal with the actual biblical calendar. If you go to Leviticus 23, it states quite clearly what the holy days are, right? You have the new year, and after the new year, 14 days in or so, you have Passover, right? And then after Passover, you have unleavened bread, you have the Feast of Weeks, you have Shavuot, otherwise known as Wicked Sunday, otherwise known as Pentecost. What Pentecost translates to day 50, what Sunday means it should be on Sunday at all times. Even on the Gregorian calendar, it always has it on Sunday, but if you look at what the Ashkenazi Jews do, it doesn't always fall on Sunday. They have it at varying degrees because they don't follow the biblical calendar, right? They don't understand the dynamics of it. They follow the rabbinic traditions or the vain traditions of men likewise. It's not, and keep in mind, this isn't a matter of hate. This is just stating the truth, stating the facts, right? Facts over feelings. So I'm not hating on anybody. I'm not trying to proclaim that everybody should be against these people or that people or what have you. I'm just stating what the truth is, right? So that said, going through the holy days, it has a pattern to it, right? There is a pattern to it. So with the Feast of Weeks, it's 7 weeks of feasting with each other after the Sabbath, which is 49 days, which leads to Pentecost, day 50, right? Then you have Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, in other words, which is the first day of the 7th month per Leviticus 23, which occurs around September, which literally means the 7th month, right? So that's just clearly there shows a correlation between the Julian calendar and the actual biblical calendar. It also shows the correlation between the modern day Hebrew calendar and the actual biblical calendar, you'll see that everything is derivative, right? So that said, there's more to the pattern of that calendar than anything else, because if you were to rely on the Hebrew calendar, that in modern day you would understand that they celebrate Rosh Hashanah as being the new year. However, it's again per Leviticus 23, which is the Torah, it's the first day of the 7th month. It is not the new year, right? Now, why is that significant? Because you'd have to understand the full dynamics of everything, because again, with the holy days after Pentecost and whatever, you have Rosh Hashanah, then you have the Feast of Trumpets, otherwise known as I'm sorry, not the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, otherwise known as Judgment Day, and what have you. Then you have the Feast of Booths, otherwise known as Sukkot, otherwise known as the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Which are a shadow of things to come, per Colossians 2:16, right? Which is Revelations, what's coming in Revelations. That's why a lot of modern Christians, not understanding the dynamic of the Bible, mistranslate it and follow the vain traditions of men. They don't understand what's going to happen in Revelations. They don't understand what they're being saved from, because they just they have faith. Faith alone is dead, right? James 2. Faith, hope, and love, 1 Corinthians 13, right? On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, referring to loving Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy heart, mind, and soul, and likewise love thy neighbor as thyself, which is the embodiment of the 10 commandments, right? So that said, that's the whole principle of the Bible, and it's dynamic. So you have this yearly celebration of the various feasts and what have you. That's what a lot of people will somewhat understand, but most don't. So those are what the yearly feasts and how everything is done occur. But then you have, if you were to go back to like Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoats and what have you, that musical or what have you, but the actual literal way it happened is Joseph was, his brothers were jealous of him, sent him and sold him into slavery into Egypt to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites in turn did what they did and what have you, and he eventually was imprisoned, and he had a dream, and he interpreted the dream of the Pharaoh, and based on the dream that he interpreted from the Pharaoh, the dream was basically referring to the 7th year Sabbath of the land, the whole purpose behind it, right? And why they do that, because based on that dream, they were able to store food up for 6 years, and on the 7th year, when there's a huge famine, he was able to provide the supplies, the surplus, to the people to ensure that people weren't starving, right? So that's the other aspect of the 7th year Sabbath of the land, and you'd have to see if they don't get the year right? If they're following the new year inaccurately, then they're not getting the 7th year Sabbath of the land accurately, right? So then you have the 50th year Jubilee, likewise, which it follows the same protocol as like the Feast of Weeks with Pentecost. You have 7 times 7 gives you 49, then you have day 50, which is Pentecost. So when it comes to the 7th year Sabbath of the land, it's 7 times 7, which gives you 49, and then you have year 50, which is the 50th year Jubilee. So the 50th year Jubilee has its own protocols and what have you, and then with that said, that's where a lot of people go wrong, because they don't follow the 50th year Jubilee, the Ashkenazi Jews, properly either. So if you refer to videos like Josh Gates on Expedition Unknown, what have you, he uncovers some truths that stem from Ethiopia and what have you, to where he's referring to basically Jews that are acting like, or Christians rather, they're acting like Jews and what have you, because they're Sephardic Jews, they're black Jews, right? Sephardic Jews are different from the Ashkenazi, and most of what's going on with the state of Israel is based off of the Ashkenazi lineage, which if you look at biblically in the Genesis and go through the line of Japheth, you'll see that Ashkenaz comes off the line of Japheth. However, the actual Israelites come off the line of Shem. So that said, they're not the actual Israelites. They're, you could say, actors in a sense, some would say, but it's not a matter of hate or what have you, it's a matter of what it is. And I grew up Baptist and what have you, and I've been taught a lot of things that were inaccurate. I was told not to read the Old Testament because all you have to worry about is John 3:16, right? So that's pushing everybody against Christianity, because especially with the hypocrisy of modern Christianity, that's why the Democrats can go up against it prominently, based on the fact that there's a lot of hypocritical actions going on with the modern day church, right? So what I do is I try to defend everybody as much as possible, because I understand that most people just follow the leader, groupthink and what have you. It's no different than Galileo, what have you, and flat earth theory and what have you. I'm looking into it, but I don't see any relevance with flat earth at all. A lot of what they say is just easily debunked, and but at the same time I do question like the moon landing now and what have you, because there's some questionable aspects to it. So especially given modern day where we should be able to get back to the moon, and yet we've never returned back to the moon since a long time, basically, since then. So it just doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't get back to the moon, especially if we were looking at colonizing other planets and everything else, because that's just perpetuating scientific notions of reality rather than trying to aspire to obtain the objective. They're just trying to lead the people with a carrot, no different than like you have with the Protestant pastor or Catholic priest or Orthodox Jewish rabbi and what have you, right? They're all following the main traditions of men, because that's what science has become, is its own religion. So in one of the other videos here, I do debunk evolution theory and the Big Bang theory utilizing actual scientific evidence that validates my exact position, because even that evolution theory is biblically derived, because biblically, if you don't love Yahweh thy Elohim and thy neighbor as thyself, which is the 10 Commandments, then you are going to die. That is survival of the fittest, right? Versus the evolution theory dynamic where we all came from animals, we may as well act like animals as their justification, because biblically, if you are followers of YahShua, in other words, you are acting like an animal, biblically derived, right? You're not being civil. So that's what evolution theory is. It's pretty much just the doctrine of anti-establishment, but I believe ultimately that in that same dynamic that the government shouldn't be establishing religion. So I agree with that. So get rid of all the principles that are correlating to the Bible with the government, and allow people to be free under natural law as long as they're not being licentious, right? Depriving other people of their rights. However, under the freedom of exercise clause of the First Amendment, we should likewise have that freedom to obey and be obedient to Yahweh, which is what I was asserting with the police, and they failed to acknowledge, because they're under the secular principle that they have the authority. However, they don't have the authority constitutionally or otherwise, right? So that's it, without going on too much of a tangent with that. Now you have the other aspect of the calendar with the 50th year Jubilee. If you go back to Genesis, to where it says the age after the transgressions and what have you occurred in the flood, that said, well, I think this was actually prior to the flood, it said that Yahweh will limit the age of man to 120 years, but that wasn't referring to 120 years. That was a mistranslation. That's actually 120 seasons, right? So if you go back to what I just indicated with all the holy days and what have you, going all the way up to the 50th year Jubilee, with all of these different years and the 50th year Jubilee having their own protocols, you would understand that that's a season. 50 years is a season. And what do you have when you multiply 120 times 50? You have 6,000, right? What year is it? Now, the Ashkenazi Jews will try to claim that it's like 57,000. The year is like 57 something, blah. I forget what the exact year is. Now, I've heard, and this is what I haven't asserted yet, and I haven't figured out for myself, and I'm working on it. If you go to my website, which I'll link out eventually. But it basically, I'm working on using the Bible and Scripture to validate the proper year, what it is currently, and the justification would be, because we're really close within the last 200 years of the final days, right? We're in the final days. The Revelations is upon us, basically, is what it is, right? So a lot of people don't understand that dynamic, so you'll have a lot of people that are prominently against the Bible and everybody aspiring towards it, because they want to oppress you, they want to keep control over you, they want to kill you, they want death, they love death, their lovers love death, right? So they can do whatever they want, what have you, but ultimately when push comes to shove, it's a matter of being obedient to Yahweh and His 10 Commandments. If you're not, you're going to That's lake of fire, second resurrection stuff versus the first resurrection. So that's why I preach what I preach. That's why I'm being heavily attacked by secular society in itself, working for various companies, doing a lot of various things. Even now that I'm self-employed, maybe here I am, I go through a stop sign. That's blasphemy. If they want to enforce that law, considering there is no victim, there is no crime, which I understand that you have the sovereign citizens that argue the same dynamic way, but I'm arguing under religious principle, because that it literally is blasphemy. They're trying to proclaim themselves as being sovereign and being deities is basically what it is, when they're not deities. They're there to serve and protect. The police and civil rights take precedence over anything and everything, right? And that's where a lot of people go wrong, because they think we live in a democracy where their feelings have precedence when we live in a constitutional republic, right? Which means the rights of the people supersede the authority of the state. You'd have to go to the Federalist Papers and everything else. And go to my website. I have a lot of everything documented. I don't have everything up there that I should, but ultimately, if I currently on the lam, so to speak, with the Department of Mental Health, they're trying to remand me because they want to, if you watch my videos and what have you, I validate that I did substantiate that I was asserting my rights and what have you. Sent them an email and what have you, saying that I'm not going to abide by the court order and blah blah blah. I got a phone call. They didn't leave me a voicemail for obvious reasons, and I don't ever answer my phone, so they're not going to get a voicemail through to me. They're going to have send me certified documentation that tells me that they acknowledge that I asserted my rights, that they have no authority over me, because that's what they don't have, that authority under the 10th Amendment. My rights are secured under the United States Constitution under the First Amendment, let alone the New York State Constitution under Article 1, Section 3. There is nothing that I did that was licentious in nature. That didn't deprive anybody of their rights or privileges or anything like that, but my rights and privileges were deprived of me under the color of law, which is Title 18, Section 242, which is why I filed 3 complaints with the Federal Division of Civil Rights, which gets escalated over to the FBI, and I haven't gotten word back, and I'll have to check my email, see if I got any level of response, but I don't think I did, because that is utilizing deprivation of rights under the color of law, and they're trying to instill fear and coerce me into compliance, which is a violation of Title 18, Section 241, right? So they literally, by trying to attack me the way they are, that's hate crimes, as I've been indicated already with the first 2 complaints, and the 3rd complaint, given the fact that the case was dismissed under 730, and they utilized that they didn't follow due process, that I wasn't provided with the paperwork and allowed the opportunity to have a hearing, file a motion for a hearing, or what have you. So based on that, they're just trying to push me under the rug, and right, that's what it is, because they know that they're wrong, and because they know that they're wrong, they're trying to mitigate responsibility, because they don't want to be responsible for their actions, but they want everybody else to be responsible for their actions, right? Well, we're the law, right? No. So that all said, that's why I did this video in regards to the calendar. That way it's clarified and what have you. I can post it, and if I do end up getting caught or whatever, for whatever reason, they end up lobotomizing me or medicating me or forcing me to do something against my will, which is against my religious principles. That way it's at least documented and asserted online, and if I happen to lose part of my brain or what have you, at least I'll have a video while I'm sitting here going, I don't know, what was that? What did he say? What did he say? So at least they'll be there, and hopefully I'll have a little bit of brain mass enough left to be compliant with Yahweh again, right? Because that's the other thing that, I mean, if you read other things like the brain that heals itself, what have you, there's a lot of people that are scientific in nature that have gone up against the mainstream science, and if you read the book The Brain That Heals Itself or something like that, I forget the exact words, changes itself, the brain that changes itself, talks about the elasticity of the mind and of the body, of the mind's ability to repair itself. So even if you have a damaged portion of the brain, it can repair itself, and that portion will take on the functions of the damaged portion. So if you lose functionality, say for instance your mobile stability, walking around because part of your brain's been damaged, if you recondition the brain and teach the brain how to assimilate that level of control of that missing section of the brain or the damaged portion of the brain, then there you go. You basically healed yourself. So that's scientific healing in that sense. So I don't contest science. I understand the dynamic because science means knowledge. Knowledge implies fact. But modern day science is used prominently to attack the church more than anything else. I mean, you have to go to the Scopes monkey trial and what have you, and what their concept was there, and who created the public education system and everything else. The Freemasons were slave owners like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was affiliated with the Hellfire Club out of Ireland, where their motto was "Do as thou wilt." They performed satanic rituals underneath the church to understand that the church above them was just as equally satanic as what they're doing below. The Freemasons support the Democrats. Democrats support the KKK, and it's still Jim Crow laws. They still do to this day. They utilize conjecture under the pretense of science as their justification to be supremacist. And they're trying to get consensus with science to go up against the big three. But I likewise will go up against the big three, but I'll utilize actual facts and knowledge rather than conjecture. So I won't try to start wars. I'm a peaceful person, right? I'm a pacifist. I do support the Second Amendment fully and what have you, but nevertheless, it's still a matter, because it's a Constitution, right? That's the Ten Commandments, right? The Bill of Rights on the United States Constitution is no different than the Ten Commandments, because America was founded by prominently Protestants, right? So when that Bill of Rights was implemented, it was created no different than the Ten Commandments. However, the government wants to pick and choose which ones they want to abide by, no different than modern Christians do, which is the whole purpose behind me being a Messianic Jew, is to enforce the structure of the Ten Commandments on the biblical level. And in so doing, I can clean house when it comes to the secular level, because if the secular level wants to come up against the church, where their powers are derived from, then that's a no bueno. They don't have that authority. They're the ones that need to change their attitude and change their dynamic, right? I won't get interfere with a secular state or what have you, but the secular state is there to protect the rights of the people, and if it's not protecting the rights of the people, then they shouldn't be the government, right? Get rid of them out, take them out of office, right? That's always been the principle ever since, even before the Magna Carta. If you went to the Magna Carta, it refers to how they were assailing the king and what have you, because they were violating the rights of the people. It's all about the rights of the people. All these arguments, it's all a matter of the rights of the people. And the government has been interfering with things like marriage. So if you want to refer to, well, you don't like gay marriage and everything else, like, I don't agree with your secular government in general, right? I don't have any affiliation. I have the same argument, right? I shouldn't have to have the government involved in my marriage in any way, shape, or form. And it shouldn't be used to give people tax benefits and tax breaks and everything else, right? Because the income tax in itself is a violation of the law, violation of the Constitution. But most people don't understand that dynamic. But also, likewise, given my religious nature and way, I automatically have a religious exemption, regardless of whether or not I file paperwork with the IRS. The code in and of itself is a violation of my religious observance, and how it needs to, like, say, for instance, writing down what your charitable donations are and what have you, when it states quite clearly in the Bible to keep your alms to yourself. It's basically trying to mandate that I give them information that violates my right, which is no different than what the police are doing, right? So that's the whole concept of the Freemasons, and why they have control over the public school system and what have you, is because they're indoctrinating kids into a secular mentality to justify having a level of authority and control over the populace, rather than promoting true equality, which is the true dynamic of true Christianity. There's no male, there's no female, there's no Jew, there's no Gentile. It doesn't matter what you do, not a matter what you look like, right? It doesn't matter what your heredity is. In other words, it's about being obedient to Yahweh and understanding that you have to love thy neighbor as yourself, and love Yahweh thy Elohim. So you can't worship grasshoppers, stars, or anything else, which a lot of people, unfortunately, I want to worship this rationally, and yet they'll sit there and try to proclaim that we're the irrational ones, right? So, yeah, good luck with that mental health evaluation, because I've proven in the interviews themselves that they're violating the law, but they don't want to acknowledge that because they are pretentious and they're trying to instill secular mentality into the church, and they don't have that right, right? So with that all said, this is the calendar aspect of everything. Hopefully I'll have enough time. Hopefully I'll be able to maintain my freedom. I am not going to abide by the court order, and I am going to continue on to live my life. And if they end up catching me or what have you, which is a violation of the law, which has been escalated over the Federal Division of Civil Rights. Hopefully they're still investigating the situation, and they're only going to cause harm to themselves. Now, I'm not capable of causing harm to them, but if they want to violate the law under the pretense that they know more or have the authority, they don't have the authority constitutionally. So assert your rights, know what's going on in the world. Hopefully this will come to you in good times, and if not, then I wish you the best. Hopefully I'll have an opportunity again to create more videos for you in the future.